Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive, system-wide paradox. We're going to dive right into the core tension between what society tells us school is supposed to do and what the sociological data reveals it actually does. I mean, we all know the promise, right? Education is the great equalizer. But as we pull back the curtain using some profound insights and data pulled directly from the Education Truth Guide, we're going to see a reality that's far more complex and honestly a lot more fascinating. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the crisis of confidence, move into the functionalist promise, uncover the hidden curriculum, face the conflict theory reality, bust the myth of standardization, and finally wrap things up with AI and systemic futures. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The crisis of confidence. Because to really understand where education is going, we first have to look at how we all view it right now. And the current state of public perception regarding higher education is, well, it's pretty alarming. The sheer velocity of the drop in public trust is just staggering. As highlighted in the Education Truth Guide, recent polling data shows public confidence in higher education has taken a stark, decade-long plunge. Back in 2015, 57% of Americans had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the institution. By 2023, that fell to 42%, and looking at the projections for 2026, it sits at a historic low of just 38%. And what's really interesting here is that while Democrats remain more confident than Republicans overall, this absolutely isn't just a partisan issue. Trust has plummeted across the board. Democratic confidence hit a new low of 50%, and Republican confidence dropped a massive 33 points since 2015. So what's driving this? Why is the public losing faith? The guide points to three primary themes. 31% cite perceived political agendas on college campuses. Right behind that, 30% point to the crippling high cost of a college education. And 25% believe colleges simply aren't preparing students well for the workforce. So these concerns range from cultural issues all the way to very direct, very localized economic anxieties. Section 2. The functionalist promise. To understand why there's such a massive gap between what we expect and what we're actually getting, we need to get a little theoretical for a second. Let's look at how early sociologists like Emile Durkheim viewed the education system's primary purpose in a modernizing world. Early sociologists essentially looked at schools as the ultimate social glue. This is the functionalist perspective of education. It argues that schools are what holds society together, breaking down into four main functions: socialization, social integration, social placement, and social and cultural innovation. The idea was that as we moved away from small traditional communities, we desperately needed a massive institution to transmit shared values, teach specialized skills for the industrial workforce, and promote a meritocracy where people could actually achieve social mobility through hard work and talent. There's a brilliant quote in the Education Truth Guide that sums this up perfectly. School is the great laboratory where the chaotic, unrefined energy of childhood is shaped into the predictable, functioning parts of a society. Education acts as this massive engine of cultural transmission. Long before you ever punch a time clock, you're being socialized into the rhythms, the hierarchies, and the explicit expectations of the modern workday. It literally teaches us how to be us. Section 3. The hidden curriculum. Because it turns out, socialization isn't just about what's printed on the syllabus. Let's pivot to what happens just beneath the surface of the official textbooks and lesson plans. We call this the hidden curriculum. These are the implicit lessons, values, and social expectations that students absorb simply by existing in a school environment. We're talking about discipline, obedience to authority, conforming to dress codes, waking up for the bell. These unspoken rules foster a competitive mindset, competing for grades and individual recognition, which, no surprise, aligns perfectly with the demands of capitalist economies. You are essentially learning the rules of the economic game without a single teacher ever explicitly writing them on a whiteboard. And beyond that hidden curriculum, schools also provide what sociologists call latent functions. These are massive structural economic functions that go way beyond just teaching the 3 Rs. Schools act as free, structured childcare for working parents. They serve as the primary hub for establishing lifelong peer relationships. And crucially, they artificially lower the national unemployment rate by keeping millions of young adults out of the full-time labor force. Section 4. The conflict theory reality. Now, if functionalism is the sunny, optimistic view of education as a unifying force, it's time to introduce its critical counterargument. We need to explore conflict theory and sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital. When we contrast these frameworks side by side, the differences are just stark. While functionalism assumes education provides social integration and equal opportunity, conflict theory asserts something radically different: that education actually promotes and reinforces existing social inequality. Conflict theorists argue the system is literally structured to favor those who already possess economic and social advantages, perpetually rewarding students who conform to the norms of the dominant class. To bring this out of the academic clouds and down to earth, the Education Truth Guide frames it this way. You weren't just a student in a classroom. You were a unit of human capital being assigned a value based on the fiscal health of your municipal district. Instead of some meritocratic utopia, the system sorts students into a hierarchy determined largely by what the guide calls the bank account of the classroom. So, the really crucial point here is this deep tension between myth and reality. The public myth is that we all contribute equally to the pot, and every child gets a standardized, equal floor of opportunity. But the reality? It's one of extreme financial fragmentation. Because school funding in the U.S. is tied directly to local wealth, zip codes, and property taxes, the quality of your education is heavily dependent on the wealth of your immediate neighbors. We don't actually have a single national system. We have thousands of fiercely guarded local fiefdoms. Section 5. The myth of standardization. This brings up a fascinating paradox. If schools are funded so unequally, why does everything feel so standardized? Let's dive into why uniform curriculum guidelines and standardized testing might actually be sabotaging equality rather than creating it. The myth is that we need these tests to be fair. The reality is that the tests serve to validate the existing hierarchy. This insight from the Education Truth Guide is incredibly powerful. By normalizing performance data across wildly different zip codes without adjusting for the massive variances in funding, standardized tests basically act as a leaderboard for inequality. They slap under-resourced schools with the label of underperforming and shift the blame for failure directly onto individual students and teachers, which completely obscures the systemic design that denied them resources in the first place. And this dynamic is perfectly captured by the peer effect. Sociologists note that when you adjust for variables like family income and parents' education, the so-called private school premium practically evaporates. Success is frequently driven by who you happen to be sitting next to. When families with massive social capital and resource abundance group together, it creates an environment of what sociologists call opportunity hoarding. The secret sauce isn't always a brilliant pedagogical method. Often, it's just the sheer force of concentrated wealth. Furthermore, the Education Truth Guide highlights a systemic analysis revealing a structural trade-off between credential signaling and actual human capital development. Elite institutions often prioritize their role as gatekeepers for top employers over providing broadly accessible instruction. This creates a ruthless winner-take-all dynamic, where the prestige of the institution you attended acts as a glass ceiling, effectively locking out those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, completely regardless of their actual potential. Section 6. AI and systemic futures. But what happens when a totally new variable enters this rigid, centuries-old system? Let's explore how new technologies are actively threatening the established gatekeeping role of modern education. Looking at the future, the guide points to a really telling shift in public perception. When people were asked if artificial intelligence will affect the importance of college degrees in the next 5 years, nearly half of Americans, 46%, believe AI will make degrees less important. Only 20% think they'll become more important. The public fundamentally sees AI as a threat to the traditional value of a degree. This technology is directly challenging the system's absolute monopoly on workforce preparation, which leaves us with a pretty massive question to close out on. As AI completely reshapes the labor market and threatens traditional credentialing, will our vast educational infrastructure finally adapt to build true, broadly accessible human capital? Or, as those conflict theorists may predict, will the system simply invent new socio-technical ways to hoard opportunity and protect elite status in a digital age? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you and keep learning.